Just a reminder, you can catch me recording this podcast live on AMP. AMP is a new live radio app that lets you call in and chat with me in person while recording. Get the app on Apple's App Store and make sure you follow me at John Middlekauff to get notified when I go live. What is going on, everybody? John Middlekauff, 3 and Out podcast. A lot of football conversation. Dak Prescott, Trey Lance, Matt Stafford struggling to relate with the youth. And the big cut down date is coming, Fast and the Furious, tomorrow and really the next couple days. A lot of roster changes. We will dive into it all. But first, make sure you subscribe to 3 and Out podcast wherever you may listen to podcasts. Apple, iTunes, same thing. Spotify, we got you covered. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the page, as well as smash that like button and leave a comment below. Interact with our content. If you're looking at my head, you see I got a 3 and Out hat on. Go to thevolume.com, search the merch, and get yourself a 3 and Out hat. Flex fit, fits fantastic. Can't recommend it enough. As well as trucker hats, we got you covered. But first, I got to tell you about my friends at Gametime. Here's what I need you to do. Download the Gametime app. They're the official ticketing app of this podcast because I want you to go to a game this fall. College game. You live in Orlando. You live in Florida. You want to go to LSU, Florida State? I would if I lived closely. I have a buddy on the staff at Florida State. He's like, come out. I said I would if it wasn't so far away, and I'd use the Gametime app. I like Florida State in that game, by the way. If you want to go to an NFL game, I got you covered. Download the Gametime app, sign up for a pair of tickets. When you use the promo code JOHN, that's JOHN, you get $20 off. In these inflationary times, it's hard to find discounts. It's hard to find deals. That's where my friends at Gametime come through with my promo code JOHN. Obviously, games, concerts, comedy shows, you name it, they got it. Interactive maps on the app. Cannot recommend them enough. Been using them forever. Gametime, promo code JOHN. Okay, I thought I was done with this conversation, at least in the short term, until I opened up the internet this morning. I saw clips from different shows. I turned on the television and saw the talking heads all discussing the low-hanging fruit, which of course they were. Is Trey Lance eventually going to replace Dak Prescott? Did they trade for Trey Lance to kick Dak Prescott to the curb because he's going to be too expensive? I have seen so many different angles and takes from the talking heads that just made me laugh. You guys do realize that Trey Lance, and I think, listen, Jimmy Garoppolo, in terms of his teams, have had more success than Dak. I do think most, level-headed people, whether you're a Cowboy 49er fan or just a universal football fan, would agree Dak is better than Jimmy Garoppolo. The 49ers would have had similar success, if not more, if they would have had Dak over Jimmy. Both have some flaws. I think Dak is the better version of Jimmy. You could argue with me. I feel pretty confident about my stance. And you guys know I'm not the biggest Dak guy. I think he's fine, but don't love paying premiums to fine, right? Same with Cousins. Dak or Jimmy's behind them. Same with Derek. They're all kind of in that vicinity, right? Somewhere between quarterback 10 and 14, 15. Now, Dak's good when he's on. Can look fantastic. A lot like Kirk Cousins. Dak in that playoff game against the shitty Tampa Bay Bucks goes, God, I'd give this guy 40 or 50 million. And then he plays the next week. You're like, what the hell is this? No, it was against the number one defense. But regardless, sometimes you need to rewind it. Trey Lance had no chance of beating out Jimmy Garoppolo as a rookie. Understandable. Number 3 pick, hadn't played. The following season, the 49ers have told people privately. Remember, Jimmy was like on the side working. He was injured. They couldn't trade him. If Jimmy was just on their team and I was going to these practices in 2022, it would have been not just inconceivable, it would have been impossible. Trey Lance would not have beaten him out. So if it was a fair and square, just like, okay, unlike the previous year where we're just naming you the backup quarterback, this year is a competition between you and Jimmy, he would have lost. We saw this year, he lost the backup competition to Sam Darnold that Kyle claimed 10, 15 days ago. To me, that was over in like the offseason. So he's never won a true quarterback competition since he's been in the pros. He is 2 years away, best case scenario, from just being a functional player where he's going to a place where he's never going to play. So there is a big picture topic in Dallas. I think Dak's cap number next year is enormous. I think it's like $59, $60 million. I looked at it earlier today. obviously the Cowboys, and rightfully so, have been Jerry Jones loves Dak Prescott. Sometimes I think he's a little over the top, but I get it. Listen, I worked in the league. When you work in a building with a guy and he's a really good player and he's a great person, you end up loving the guy. Like when I was in Philly, we loved Shady McCoy and Brent Selleck. Like it was easy to like certain guys on your team. Their personality, you spend a lot of time with them. And I understand why Jerry likes Dak Prescott probably more than 99% of people that work in the NFL. It's very understandable. But Jerry also knows that Trey Lance is not even in the same universe as a player. That's not why he made the trade. We discussed this yesterday. He's a deal maker. He struck it big in oil. Jerry likes taking some big swings. I don't blame him. I think it's enjoyable. It makes this league pretty entertaining. It makes the Cowboys kind of entertaining because Jerry does some off-the-wall shit. And I think Jerry would tell you right now, I gave a 4th-round pick. We're going to be good. What is that? Pick 130 and a couple $1 million. See how much I'm worth? I don't care about any of this. It's a flyer. It's worth it if it does pan out. He's not wrong. But this notion that Trey Lance could take over for Dak Prescott is not just laughable and unrealistic. It's borderline impossible. It's not going to happen. Hell, if Dak Prescott got hurt, he wouldn't even be the first guy Mike McCarthy went to. We're talking about the 3rd-string quarterback. The other thing I hadn't really thought of, but I saw a couple people saying this, and then Gottlieb filled in for Coward today on the radio, and I went on a show, and Gottlieb asked me if I saw parallels between Aaron Rodgers when they drafted Jordan Love to kind of, just light a fire to create some urgency like I see with them trading for Trey Lance and Dak Prescott. And I say, actually, I don't see any, because people forget when they drafted Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers was much older, and 2, it looked like might be trending down. Like his career might be much closer to ending than going to win 2 MVPs. The other thing is Aaron Rodgers, once he got to practice, got to know, he never had an issue with Jordan Love, the guy. If anything, he's over the top in how much he likes Jordan Love and is rooting for the guy. He had an issue with the mindset behind the front office. It was an FU to Aaron. But once he saw the guy, 1, I don't care who they would have drafted. That guy was never beating out Aaron Rodgers. And 2, he saw with his own eyes, like, yeah, I don't have to worry about anything. Well, Dak Prescott already knows this guy couldn't win the backup job against Sam Darnold. So from a player standpoint, it doesn't cross Dak's mind, and it shouldn't. Like, this guy is coming in. If anything, Cooper Rush is like, are they going to like this guy more than me because they're paying him some money, even though I know that I've proven more in the NFL. But to think that Dak Prescott, 1, is worried about being replaced, and 2, they're using this to kind of create some urgency for him to play better, to be more focused, whatever, I just don't see it. I think this move was very black and white, was very, on the most basic level, was Jerry just saw the potential to get some value. And if it doesn't work, nobody cares from the Cowboys. And I think I said this yesterday, and I've said this talking about this situation a lot. No one, and I repeat, no one, no team, no coaching staff, no front office will ever remotely care about Trey Lance and have the desire to see him succeed like the 49ers did for those 2.5 years because of what they invested into him. Not the $30 million they paid him, but the picks. And what ultimately those picks represent, and now I think it's universally known as the worst trade in NFL history. The Cowboys, let's just say hypothetically, Trey goes, 3rd quarterback. I don't exactly know how they run practice. Part of the way the 49ers, we talked about this, was only 2 quarterbacks play. 1 guy with the starters during practice and the other guy with the scout team. So if I have a 3rd quarterback, he just stands there and watches. He might as well be running gassers on the sideline. Now, maybe Mike does it a little different at practice, but there is a chance that his reps at practice are closer to zilch than they are splitting reps with anybody. So Jerry doesn't care about any of that. Like, Jerry doesn't set up practice. Hell, Jerry's not even involved with who's running scouting. That's Mike McCarthy's deal. That's what makes Jerry so unique when it comes to being the GM. He can do whatever the fuck he wants at any moment, which has to be a pretty incredible feeling as a human being. Most people listening, and I know I am, kind of jealous. I would love to have that feeling of just, I own an NFL team. I'm also the GM. I can just do whatever. And as he said, like, yeah, Mike didn't even know. We told him after the fact. And I've said this before too. Like, what if he claimed Mike liked him, but are we sure? Here's what I know. I know Mike likes Dak Prescott. He's won a lot of games in the last 2 years, and clearly he likes Cooper Rush. So I saw this when I scouted with Philly. Position coaches and head coaches, just because scouts in the front office like a guy, even though Jerry's the owner, just because he likes a player, and I don't even know how much he actually likes Trey. It's not like he broke down the film. Doesn't mean the head coach, who actually is the one calling the plays and setting up practice, actually does. So when you force players on guys, and I'm not saying Jerry forced this player on him, but there's no guarantee. Like, Jerry ain't going to practice every day. No chance. None. Jerry probably comes to the office a couple times a week. So like Jerry was told, he said in his press conference, he's like, I heard after the fact that Trey Lance played really well against the Bears in the monsoon. No, Jerry, he did not. He looked terrible in that game. Do you think Jerry was breaking down the film? Most GMs, I would say all of them, if they're making a big trade, are the ones watching the tape, working with their scouts. That's not really how the Cowboys work. And ultimately for this move, doesn't really matter because they have a starting quarterback. That I do think there are some complications to the negotiations, right? Because if you're Dak, you're like, well, I'll take a 4-year extension at $180 million, right? Guarantee me 150. He was just making 40 at minimum. He's going to want 40. He's going to want to raise $45 million. Like, I'm making Pro Bowls. I'm leading us to the playoffs every year. I got to be worth more now than I was years ago. So you want to pay premiums for premiums. Easy to pay Joe Burrow a lot of money. Jalen Hurts after he takes you to the Super Bowl. Obviously Patrick Mahomes, Nick Bosa, you name it. Trent Williams, the elite Micah Parsons. It's like, whatever, we got to overpay a little bit. Dak, it is, no matter how much they openly talk about their love for him, which I get, it's easy to like high character, good people. Those are most of the people all of us want to be friends with, want to be in business with. Ideally, you get the high character, great humans who are elite at their job, and whatever your business is, you make a lot of money with them. But sometimes, like in this situation, got some flaws. Doesn't have the greatest arm, turns the ball over a little bit too much, hasn't proven in the biggest moments in the playoffs since really his rookie year when he played really well in the playoffs and they lost to the Packers, that he can play well in these big spots. And maybe Jared would be like, listen, we ran into the top defense in the league a couple years in a row, and it was tough. But that's who you're going to play in the playoffs. So I think there's a lot of urgency with the Dak situation, but I think Trey Lance factors into that much closer to 0% than what some of these people are talking about, because it's just, he's a non-factor in the Dak Prescott situation. And a huge reason he hasn't played, and one, how's he ever going to play to prove anything to anyone in Dallas? I saw a story today which was quoting the wife of Matt Stafford, Kelly Stafford, discussing Matt struggling to connect with his young teammates. Obviously, the Rams have a lot of young guys, a lot of turnover on their roster. And one thing she claimed is like, these young people just look at their phone all the time. They don't even look him in the eye. And when they do, they like call him yes, sir, no, sir. They almost speak to him like an authority figure. And Matt's uncomfortable. He's like, I'm your teammate. We're all on the same level. I might make way more than you, but I'm going to throw you the ball. You're going to block for me. You're going to make tackles when I'm on the sideline after we score. Like, we're all on equal footing here. And he had the equipment staff essentially print out like pictures of these guys from Instagram and Facebook, of their pictures of what they like, so he could figure out who everyone was, because he was struggling to connect. And where I stand on the Rams. I'm out. I think they are going to be terrible. Clearly the Cardinals, who cut Colt McCoy, who was banged up last year, and maybe I have a false sense of how good Colt McCoy is. Loved him since college, and a couple years ago he lit up the 49ers like he was Carson Palmer, but that's not the norm. So cutting Colt McCoy actually isn't that crazy. Kyler's hurt. They'll go with Tanner Muse and Joshua Dobbs, and they're cool with losing. They're going to try, like in theory, like their players will try. Their coaches will do game plans. They're just going to lose a lot. I think the same thing's going to happen to the Rams. And I do think this is symbolic of like, they're just kind of all over the map, right? They got this quarterback who they paid a ton of money. I Googled today Well, I didn't. I went to Spot Track. I just typed into Google Matt Stafford's contract because like, how much is he making again? They guaranteed him $130 million when he signed his contract after the Super Bowl. His dead cap, they're stuck with this guy for years. So even if they bottom out this year, he gets injured, and they end up drafting a quarterback, it's not like they're cutting him. He's still going to be around. And this gets to the like Sean McVay by the end of the season when Matt Stafford inevitably gets banged up and clearly him and his teammates don't even know each other, is going to be over this. And honestly, it felt like it this offseason when Coward reported they tried to get him to take a pay cut. When Michael Lombardi reported they tried to trade him. Like Sean McVay, listen, I can be impatient as well. I bet a lot of people listening have some patience issues. We're all human beings, especially, us alphas. We get short fuses. And that's something I've really worked on as I've gotten older, trying to be more patient, but it's hard. I never fault anyone for lack of patience. It's a difficult trait to have. But when it comes to football and being a football coach, there is a balancing act. How can you go, and I get emotions were high after you win the Super Bowl, to giving a guy $130 million to a year later trying to get him to restructure / trade him? And that's Sean McVay. I've been saying this forever. I think he's a better version of the younger John Gruden. And John Gruden was notoriously known for being hot and cold with players. One day he loves you. The next day he wants to replace you, which historically in the NFL, when contracts were much smaller, whatever, like replace you, treat you like a stock. One day you're in, one day you're out. In modern day football, you've seen this with Sean McVay. You can't, and Sean, it feels like, falls in love a little stronger than even Gruden. You sign these enormous deals from Todd Gurley to last year, Allen Robinson to a couple years ago, Matt Stafford. And then you're just kind of over it, which the problem is with guaranteed money impacts your books and your ability to add people on and off your roster are dependent on those books. And because you give out enormous signing bonuses and guaranteed amounts of money, you're kind of getting stuck with players. The reason Matt Stafford had no trade value this summer was easy to see when I looked at his fucking contract. Just like Todd Gurley, you couldn't give him away. You had to cut him because I can see after the season ends, you make a Super Bowl run, you win the Super Bowl. It's like, give him whatever he wants. And then 6 months later, you're over it. Either because the guy's injured or you just realize, God, I made an emotional decision. And I think I don't even think the story was that weird because I think young people are not alone. I think it's absolutely bullshit. I am as guilty as anyone on my phone. I do not have an addictive personality. Like it's impossible for me. I mean, I've never tried like hard drugs, but alcohol, you name it. I don't get addicted to things. If anything, I'm addicted to, I guess, football. But I've seen people addicted to football. Like me, Andy Reid don't have much in common, right? So my addiction, I don't think I have an addictive personality. But I can't argue that I'm pretty addicted to my phone. I'm not proud of it, honestly, at times, especially if I'm there by myself. I think it's kind of sad. Honestly, kind of embarrassed about it at times. But there's nothing I can do. I just try to justify it by the way I feed my unborn children, the way my life, what's paying for my new house is like through the phone. That's how I earn my business. But like I said, not proud of it at all. And if you're my age or older, you grew up in a generation that this phone, you didn't have a computer in your pocket. First phone I had was a Nokia. The game on that was Snake, which was freaking awesome. But if you showed a 20-year-old Snake right now, they would laugh at you, right? I mean, I could download basically any game in America on my iPhone, I'm sure. Madden, NBA Jam, you name it. NBA Jam even makes me sound old. But my point is that we live on these things. So I think when Matt Stafford, who is like the hybrid of both generations, like he's closer to my age, so he used to just be in a world in college and even early on in the pros where the phone didn't do absolutely everything. I don't fault any young person for looking at that thing constantly, especially a young athlete, from a major program who they've gotten so much validation. I'm not saying it's healthy, but it's very, very understandable. And guys like Stafford and Peyton Manning, these older generations, clearly Aaron Rodgers. You can say it's propaganda or whatever on Hard Knocks, making Rodgers look like this high-level guy. I do think he's gone above and beyond to try to connect because you have to, right? We all do. Sometimes we'll be laying in bed, like watching a TV show, and I'll look over, we're both on our phones. And we try to be like, hey, let's just put our phones down and watch the show. And then one of our phones will buzz and we'll pick it up. I'm sure everyone listening can relate to this. None of us are proud of this. They're not. And the only person proud is Apple because they fucking sell more phones than they know what to do with. And I'm talking into a Mac, looking at an iPad with my phone on the other counter charging. So they're the only ones truly smiling over this, as they've addicted us all. And we can't live without it. And it definitely makes, in a world, right, where you do still have to connect. You do, because people do business with people they know, right? People, these teams that are really close, like Mahomes and Kelsey, and these guys are really tight-knit, right? The 49ers, I've seen it for years. The guys are friends. And to create any sort of friendship, a close-knit bond, there's a human element to this all that the phone and just the devices remove. And I understand Matt Stafford, like, ideally, would he have liked his wife to out this to the country? No, that's not the Rams' problem. The Rams' problem is their roster blows. The Rams' problem is they put all of everything they bought on a credit card. Now, ultimately, that led to a Super Bowl. But now the Bills do. And they haven't had, I think I heard someone say this. I mean, it's probably real. They have one first rounder on defense. It's Aaron Donald. Their team is like a three-headed monster. And a couple of them are already turning, Cooper Kupp's been injured now. He was injured in training camp. He was injured last season. Stafford's just a weathered 35. Any Detroit Lion fans knows he got the shit kicked out of him for years. And I have a lot of admiration for Stafford's toughness, his grittiness. Obviously, his fit, his arm's elite. That's why a lot of people rooted for him. It's like, God, this guy kind of looks like a Favrean lion here. But he was just getting peppered. And he's not your typical, 35-year-old in the NFL. Some of these guys, like when Mahomes gets there, when Burrow gets there, when Herbert, when Lawrence, when they get to 35, they're not going to be as weathered as Stafford. They played in a league that protected them. And some of those guys have had injuries. Stafford came into the league in a time where it still looked a lot closer to like the 1985 Bears, where people could get depleted. There was no defenseless receiver. You know why? He was just called a receiver. There was no helmet to helmet. It was just called a tackle. It's the football I grew up on and loved. And I've said forever, I understand why the NFL regulated it out and just got away from that. One, obviously CTE, the lawsuits, and just they have to keep their quarterbacks upright. But one of the most famous Stafford clips as a Lion is that moment. It's either a shoulder or rib against the Browns. He gets destroyed. It's like he couldn't barely move. And he found a way to win the game. It's like a legendary clip. And that's a different NFL than now. So this is going to be a big story. Whatever. I probably don't have that much in common with a 22-year-old. It's honestly pretty remarkable. I always thought this about coaches, how a guy 63 years old could get so close to someone 20 years old. Now usually they got to be good players, but coaches are good at it. It's harder and harder to relate to people that grew up dramatically different than you in terms of the way they look at the world with technology. But that's just not this. The Rams' problem is they stink. And Stafford is just probably going to get hurt. And they're probably not going to win many games. So this story is going to be big for a couple days. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Part of the problem is he has to learn these guys' names because they're probably fringe NFL players. He didn't have to learn Jalen Ramsey's name or Todd Gurley's name. I guess Todd wasn't on the team, but you know what I mean, right? He didn't. Andrew Whitworth, nice to meet you. I already know who you are. So yeah, McVay's got to learn to be a little less emotional when he signs these contracts. And this is going to be a long season. It really is. One thing that's about to happen is and some of it's slowly been happening, is you're going to cut your roster. Not every team's at 90, but between 85 and 90 guys down to 53 men, right? And they will, quote unquote, be your official roster, which is obviously very fluid. And just because you make the roster on Tuesday or Wednesday does not mean you're going to play week one, does not even mean you're going to make it to practice next Monday, right? Guys are getting cut, guys are getting claimed. But I was reading Peter King, and he had a good point. He said a GM told him, we don't look at it like 53 guys. We look at it like a 69-man roster. And it's so true. Obviously, if you make the 53-man roster, it's an incredible accomplishment, especially as a late-round pick, as an undrafted free agent. It's just an incredible moment for you individually, for the program that you came from, for your family. It's awesome. But making the roster tomorrow or Wednesday is a lot different than actually playing in a game this year. Like, just because you make a roster, some guys never see action. Some guys are inactive every single week. Some guys, get to play week one, especially if you're a high round pick. But you never know. It's a very fluid situation. But I thought about, it is a 69-man roster because the NFL, the amount of guys that get injured, the amount of teams that underwhelm and just bench guys, most guys on your roster are not Matt Stafford or Aaron Donald. They aren't just on scholarship, are being paid so much money, no matter what, are just going to play, right? And when I say Aaron Donald, obviously he deserves to play. But, the only way Matt Stafford is not playing is injury. It's what I say about Dak Prescott. Trey Lance isn't sniffing the field if Dak Prescott can play on Sundays, even if he's banged up. If Dak Prescott is physically able to play Sundays, he's a 17-game starter. Does not come out. Most positions, though, half the league is going to go under 500, meaning that they're going to have some rough stretches, rough losses. Well, most of the guys in the league are on easy contracts to replace. You're not paying that much money. You go, let's bench this guy. Let's cut this guy. And when you do that, the 16 guys on your practice squad, usually one of them gets elevated, and those guys get a chance to play. So while it sucks relative to making the team to get cut and then having to go to a practice squad, relative to the rest of America, pretty good. You get paid $11.5 thousand a week. Now it's a week-by-week contract, so you're not guaranteed to make the whole season. You can be cut at any moment. But if you play the entire season, you make over $200,000. So relative to most of your peers, like most 22-year-olds who aren't technically on an NFL roster, $200,000 is pretty good. But if you get called up and you get your opportunity, which a large percentage of these people get, if you think about the 90-man rosters, I was thinking about this the other day. I would say probably on average, there is somewhere between 75 and over just probably don't have any business being in the NFL. They're just kind of filling. They played in college, but they're not NFL players. They're kind of tweeners. Like in baseball, they call it the 4A guys, right? They're good enough for AAA, but they're definitely not good enough for the majors. So that's a lot of guys, right? You're good enough in training camp. The position coaches liked you. You play in the fourth quarter of the preseason games, but you're never going to be good enough to play. The NFL, they don't even honestly really want you for the practice squad. They definitely don't want you for your 53 guy. Man. Then there's the group from 54 to 75 that are all a snap or two away from a year of improvement, from being a backup on an NFL team, from having a 5-7 year career. Every single guy in the NFL, we say this all the time about the backup quarterback, one snap away. Well, if you're on a practice squad, you're literally a bad couple games or a couple injuries away from being the starter. You're an injury away from getting called up and being the backup. So I see a lot of players, and I'm sure a lot of you listening follow guys on Instagram, follow guys on Twitter. They get very sensitive. Be very, just treat these guys like humans, right? Don't be oh yeah, this guy got cut, he sucks. And I agree. But most of these guys getting cut aren't being told you're done. Give me your key card. Give me your playbook. Get the hell out of our building. They're literally being told, keep your playbook. We want to resign you. We hope no one else wants to sign you for the practice squad. Show up tomorrow. That is 16 guys a team. I mean, you're talking, there's a lot of people. 160 16 times 32. You're talking a lot of players that played in the preseason. While they're being cut, they're still being, hey, we want to give you $200,000 and we just need you to show you can improve doing X, Y, or Z. And if there's an injury, if there is underwhelming play at your position, we think that you could help us out this season. So this notion that I think a lot of former players, when they throw this out there, everyone getting cut, nobody wants them. That's just bullshit. Like, that's just not the case. From 54 to 69, those are guys that you want around. And really, you view when you re-sign a guy to practice squad, you have to view them as having upside to make your roster. If you don't, you try to sign someone else. And once I cut you, obviously I can claim you. But if I don't want to claim you because I have to put you on the 53-man roster, I can sign other guys that go unclaimed to my practice squad. So I go, hey, we have this corner on our team, but this corner on the Patriots who Bill cut, we'd rather have that guy on our practice squad. And hell, you can offer more than 11.5 a week. You could offer the rookie minimum. Now, obviously, to make a team as a rookie, the lowest amount you can make is $750,000. So there is a big gap from $200,000 and $750,000. Last time I checked, that's almost 4x. So I'm not acting like you don't want to make the roster. Clearly, that's the goal of every young player in a training camp. My ultimate point is being cut over the next 24, 48 hours and being told you got to come back on practice squad is not the end of the world. I mean, you're closer to playing by like week 2 than you ever realize. And it's going to be all over the internet, devastation. It's not that bad if you're in that group, which, as we just did the math, over half the guys on every team getting cut are in that group. Other than that, what a week of football, baby. It's back.